All right, I believe we are live here. Ken, thanks for joining us here again. Once again, as always, it's new and improved. It's terrible. I'm getting like a weird mix minus thing. Are you hearing any delay on my end, Ken?
Nothing. No.
All right, maybe I can. That's very distracting. Um, all right, I don't know why that's doing that. It's not good. I'll tell you that. But we're going to get started with the Gestalt IT rundown here. Hi, thanks for joining us. I don't want to be anticlimactic here. We're doing some very brief troubleshooting. It's really pronounced.
What is it? Is it a delay of some sort?
Yeah, I'm getting myself back in my headphones. Now, I do record my audio locally, but I don't know why there would be a delay. Let me try shutting that down and seeing. No, it's weird. Still getting myself back in my ears. So I just have to put up with it, I guess. Okay. Well, I have the agenda locked and loaded here. Ken, are you excited?
Very. So excited.
Oh man, this is the best. All right, so we're gonna play some music. Then we're gonna be talking about some IT news coming right at you right now. Hello all and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino, editor with Gestalt IT. That's the name of the website. Dealing with some technical issues here. That's okay. Joining me on the other side of the screen, but not the other side of my heart, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Ken Nalbone. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Rich. A pleasure to be with you once again. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it has. Tom has ably filled your shoes, but he can only succeed you, never replace you. So let's get right into the meat of the show, a little segment we like to call News or Not. If you haven't watched the rundown before, this is where when there's a little too much news, maybe something that doesn't warrant a full discussion, I go to Ken and I ask, is this news or is this not? We do it. It's a lot of fun. Are you ready, Ken?
I am ready.
I feel like we need like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, kind of like doodle-doo,
maybe
theme setting music.
Go for it. I'll let you run with that one.
All right, first up here, Mozilla is taking Project Things, its implementation of the W3C standard Web of Things, out of the experimental stage, adding new logging, alarm, and networking features, along with a new name, Mozilla Web Things. I guess they wanted to sound like it was from 1994. Web Things Gateway is a privacy security focused software It's a privacy and security focused software distribution for smart home gateways, and WebThings Framework is a library of reusable software components. It's meant for commercial projects, and Mozilla hopes it can become a trusted agent for users of smart home devices. Mozilla is a thing now? News or not?
Well, this is sounds like a consumer product mostly. And we like to cover enterprise news. So I say, nah. I do like the fact that they focus on privacy and security, which are severely lacking in many IoT frameworks. So if they kind of pivot to an enterprise IoT platform, then yes, but that's not what this is, at least not yet.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see some very small businesses, kind of implement that. And so it's nice, like you said, nice to have a security and privacy focus to this, but yeah. All right, next up, some interesting legal news. After being arrested in 2017 for distributing banking malware, Marcus Hutchins has pled guilty to conspiracy and to making, selling, and advertising illegal wiretapping devices. He claims the 10 charges to date back from his younger days, and he has since turned a new leaf, but takes responsibility for his past actions, which I guess his lawyers required him to do. He came to national prominence, if the name is familiar to you, during the WannaCry ransomware crisis, when he discovered the killswitch domain hard-coded into the malware and subsequently registered the domain to prevent the spread further. He is awaiting sentencing, but faces up to 5 years in prison as part of his plea. Great Hat Hacker gets sentenced. News or not, Ken?
I think so. I remember when this story broke, first of all, when he was kind of thrust into the spotlight for stopping WannaCry. And then secondly, when he was invited to Black Hat here in the US, I believe it was back in 2017, just a few months later. and then was arrested when he tried to leave the country. And, there was a lot of outrage within the InfoSec community, but then people looked a bit closer. And they're like, well, actually, there's some merit to these charges. Apparently, he did dabble in the quote unquote dark side of information security in his youth, but it's a clear case of, do the time or do the crime, do the time, right? It's not necessarily unwarranted. He has pled guilty. He's admitted it, but he's claiming he's turned over a new leaf. For what it's worth, I kind of believe him, especially since, I read about this on is it Brian Krebs on security, his blog, and he's a pretty trustworthy news source when it comes to information security news. But I think this is news. It serves as a great cautionary tale for those folks who are, particularly young folks, interested in getting involved in information security, that you don't have to be a black hat first to become a white hat later. There's probably a safer path, and you need to watch out because your actions will have consequences. So, yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is worthy of noting that this would, because of his involvement with WannaCry and very significant. I mean, it's really significantly stopped the spread of that malware. But otherwise, we would never have heard of this. He would have been a, kind of small time security blogger, or small time in terms of national prominence, so just kind of interesting there. All right, next up, the French government launched Tchap on April 18th, an end-to-end encrypted messaging app designed to replace government use of other messaging services. Tchap is based on the open source Riot messaging app, and the source code is published on GitHub. So these are all good things when you're developing software, I think, especially for the government. The app is designed so that only French government employees can sign up for an account. But on the day of the launch, security researcher Baptiste Robert, who has a fantastically French name, discovered a flaw that would let anyone register by adding a government email domain on top of a normal email address. So you would have johnsmith@gmail.com @frenchgovernment.gov or whatever. And then they could also, once they get access, potentially view internal communications. The flaw has subsequently been patched, but open source working the way it should, or government software always being a bad idea, Ken? News or not?
Kind of news. It's not clear to me whether this is a flaw in the open source product that the French government used, or whether it was just a bad implementation by yet another inept government agency, right? Which wouldn't surprise me. So regardless of which one's the case, it's probably always a good idea to contract these kinds of things out, as most governments do, so that you get the competent people working on it, or at least you have somebody to blame. I don't necessarily think it's that huge of a news story, since it was patched quickly, but it was at least a big story for that brief period of time when anybody could sign up. But thankfully, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, and the only thing I hope is that it doesn't dissuade people or government specifically from, the kind of transparency that open source requires. I think that's always a good thing, whether, you take a project and you maybe don't do the homework to, fully give it the layers of security that you need as a government. It's kind of on you, but I hope this doesn't mark a return to more proprietary means for this, because I do think that's good on principle.
Exactly. I agree.
All right. CNBC reports that according to sources, Apple is spending more than $30 million a month on Amazon Web Services, a 10% increase on the year, and part of a $1.5 billion commitment over the next 5 years. That's all according to sources. Apple has not said any of this. Apple has disclosed previously that they use AWS for iCloud storage, and with over 1 billion iOS devices out there, the bill doesn't seem that far out there for that. Apple is building out their infrastructure for expanding service offerings. They've committed to spend $4.5 billion by the end of 2019 as part of a $10 billion overall investment in data centers by 2023. But is being responsible for 1.4% of AWS annual revenue news or not, Ken?
I'd say nah. I'm surprised it wasn't more, to be honest. But it seems like there's yet another big name customer AWS announcement every week. So their revenue just seems to be growing. And, when we talk about Apple building data centers, is that going to eventually decrease their spend on AWS and decrease AWS's revenue overall? Well, it might decrease their spend, but probably AWS's revenue is only going to continue to increase, at least in the near future, because it just has been going like gangbusters. So, meh.
Yeah, I would like to see their hybrid cloud deployment, right? Or their hybrid multi-cloud craziness that they have to go on to have that kind of support for all their services, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It'd be really interesting. All right. Next up, the Redmond Whisperer Mary Jo Foley reports that her sources are telling her Microsoft has killed plans to integrate the window management feature Sets into Windows 10. Sets allowed for users to group app data, websites, and information into tabs, basically letting you look at everything in a browser UI. In testing, the feature wasn't well understood, and implementing apps like Office would have reportedly taken a comprehensive overhaul. Sets was an ambitious vision for how Windows would organize apps in the future. News or not that it's gone, Ken?
Considering I didn't know this existed until I just heard about it, apparently it's a feature that they announced, but I have not heard a lot of excitement around it. And I had a bigger reaction to hearing that Paint was going to remain on Windows 10 than I did about hearing that this feature was being canceled. So,
The one thing that I thought was interesting with Sets is that it put browser tabs on parity with applications. So one of the things that I always can't stand is that you can't alt tab between tabs. I know there's a separate command for it, but for me, tabs are just another application usually, right? And I want to cycle through those just like I would my mail client, my calendar, that kind of stuff. And Sets kind of set out a vision where you could do that. And that's the main reason I'm kind of disappointed that that's gone. All right, next up here, Ken. Intel releases new Coffee Lake Refresh 9th generation CPUs. These still use the same 6-core Skylake microarchitecture, but with power optimizations and running on Intel's very long in the tooth 14 nanometer process. These offer up to 8 cores on i9s and are able to hit 5 gigahertz on turbo at only 95 watts. No 10 nanometer, no really cheap quad core. Is Intel's 9th gen news or not, Ken?
It's not. It's a consumer product. There are no major advancements, just kind of small baby steps. They really need to get off 14 nanometer, and they can't do it. So until then, there don't seem to be any major major achievements within their consumer chip line.
Yeah, and it is, notable. Intel has released or at least announced new scalable Xeons. We saw that their innovation data centric day or whatever they were calling it. We covered that at techfieldday.com. You can see a number of videos on that. They're doing up to 52 cores now or 56 cores?
It was one of those two. It was over 50. It was a pretty big number. I don't remember.
And they're doing that by basically gluing together two 26 core chips that they had kind of already had out there. Still amazing that they can do it in a usable power envelope. But yeah, the consumer side, I don't know. They have competition from AMD. Mm-hmm. It seems like they just can't deliver anything else.
Yeah, and unless you're like building a gaming PC, you probably don't really care that much about analyzing very closely which CPU you're buying. They're all pretty good. Do some basic research and understand what's right for you, and just buy it.
All right. Well, first up here in kind of our discussion stories, Ken, at Tesla's Autonomy Day, which confirms we have just too many company days, CEO Elon Musk said that all new Model 3, X, and S vehicles will include the Tesla's self-driving silicon. This marks the completion of transition away from NVIDIA's Drive platform. Tesla also revealed that they're working on next-generation hardware aimed at offering 3 times the performance and plans to have it in production in 2 years. Tesla claims that with their hardware, their vehicles are now capable of processing full autonomous operation, but are just waiting on the software to catch up. If Tesla can wean themselves off NVIDIA's platform, should NVIDIA be concerned that other automakers will follow?
I say no. I mean, Tesla's kind of the rare case of doing everything when it comes to their car technology, and the auto manufacturers are still catching up in many ways to Tesla. Making their own silicon isn't going to be their primary, goal, in at least not in the next several years. I don't think so. It's not going to add to their bottom line necessarily when they can just stick a ready-made platform, a ready-made solution from a manufacturer like NVIDIA in there, and kind of then move their own self-driving car business forward. That's probably what they're likely to do, in my estimation. So NVIDIA still has a stranglehold on this market, from what I can tell, from chip manufacturers, and losing Tesla might have some impact because they make so many of the very popular electric and self-driving cars. But it's an industry that is growing, and all the traditional auto manufacturers are likely to be their customers for the next several years.
I mean, do you think there's any chance that Tesla comes out there, maybe once they've achieved a level 3 or a level 4 autonomy on their cars, and say, hey, the Tesla autonomy platform is available for licensing, especially if they're having continuing financial pressures?
That's true. I guess that could happen. It all depends on whether or not they want to play nice with the other auto manufacturers and do that, and whether or not the other auto manufacturers want to in kind. How do they view Tesla as a competitor? Do they want to give them any extra capital by actually buying their platform that will then go back into their R&D for what's essentially a very strong competitor to the traditional auto companies? That's difficult to say.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if another automaker sees NVIDIA with that stranglehold and thinks, maybe some competition, might be better for the industry overall, but that's a long way off.
And the way that they design cars is like, it takes so long to engineer and design a car that they're probably not just going to rapidly change gears and switch the platform within their self-driving cars. They probably want to design one model and make minor iterations on it over the next few model years, like they've done for decades. Yeah. So they're probably not going to swap out the self-driving silicon and software within that from one minor release to the next.
Yeah, although maybe that's where NVIDIA's modular approach bites them a little bit, but we'll see.
We shall see.
In other chip news, Samsung announced plans to invest more than $116 billion in non-volatile chips over the next decade. This includes $63 billion for R&D and $52 billion on fabs and other production infrastructure. The moves show the company is shifting focus from purely memory and smartphone markets, which have stagnated or are in all-out decline. This sets them up to rivals as TSMC and increasingly Huawei as well. Huawei was releasing a number of AI-focused chips over this past week. We don't have samples or anything like that. It was just announcements, so that's kind of why we're not focusing on those on this show. But the company aims to be logic chip leaders by 2030. Is this inevitable given the amount of money they're throwing at it?
I don't know if it's inevitable. It's certainly a good effort. Traditionally, I think of Samsung as a memory and screen manufacturer, frankly. And yes, I guess chips too, a bit in the mobile space. It looks like 5G, connected cars, and AI are the focus. Those are all good, segments to get into, good markets to get into. But they're going to face stiff competition from the likes of, say, NVIDIA, who just bought Mellanox, or Qualcomm, who just struck a major exclusive deal with Apple. So it's probably a good idea to invest in chip manufacturing. Whether or not they can become a leader with the other manufacturers that are also ratcheting up efforts is difficult to say, though 2030 is a long way out. So it is possible. I don't know if it's inevitable, though.
Well, and Samsung is always, at least historically, kind of competes against itself in a lot of ways. So I don't expect them to fully move away from TSMC. I mean, they put Qualcomm chips in their smartphones all the time, right? Because those work better in certain markets than their Exynos processors. So, I could see that kind of competition actually making this better in the long run. But, fabs are super expensive to make. I mean, that's one of the reasons why basically everyone goes fabless after a while, other than 3 companies, basically. And so getting into that market shows what a land grab we still have for AI, 5G, those kind of emerging markets where there aren't set leaders yet. There are companies well poised to be in that space, but I think it's very interesting. All right, an interesting partnership was announced this week. Arm and Docker announced a strategic partnership to streamline development and delivery of apps in the cloud, edge, and IoT. At DockerCon, the company will demonstrate ARM capabilities built into Docker desktop community, and all developer commands will work directly on ARM. You don't have to learn anything new to kind of run your stuff on ARM. Docker is also integrating the ability to push Docker Enterprise Engine for ARM-based Amazon EC2 A1 instances into production. Basically, Docker will make it easier to run apps on ARM, and ARM will make Docker solutions available on the ARM Neoverse platform. With the dominance of Kubernetes in the cloud, is the edge and IoT a logical space for Docker to target?
I think it is. I think containers are a good fit for IoT simply because of, as we talked about, the application portability nature. If you've got a fleet of IoT devices and you want to push the latest version of the app to them, you've got a way to do that. If you want to update a bunch of outdated devices, you're just going to go to all your sites and kind of rip and replace. Now you have an easy way to get the application, the software you want, back on those devices without rewriting it, refactoring it, doing all kinds of testing. So it's a great fit, and it's different enough than Kubernetes, which is a completely different application architecture, way of controlling apps that is well suited for web scale, for large scale applications that are broken out into many component parts, but work together as one cohesive large application, which is not exactly what IoT does. So it's kind of Docker trying to find their place in this container world now that Kubernetes has taken a lead. And, this is probably a good way to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we'll need to see exactly what this looks like, what kind of developer interest there is for it. I mean, I still think there is a lot of goodwill out there for Docker, but recently the narrative has definitely been this is a company that not in decline, but has lost out on the cloud and is trying to find their place.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of shows a vision from the company that I think is encouraging for a lot of people.
Sure, yeah, and containers can be more than just a cloud native application platform. There's so many other things. This is a good example of that.
Yeah, and I wonder if this also has a really positive implications for the security situation with IoT, where maybe with a containerized approach, it's just a lot easier to push out security patches, updates, that kind of thing without fundamentally breaking anything.
That's a good point that I hadn't considered. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge concern in IoT. Kind of as we already touched on that earlier during the episode, and absolutely, that could help make a huge difference.
I mean, I think we're both in agreement. This is a much bigger announcement for Docker than it is for ARM, right?
Yes, yeah. ARM is just gaining acceptance as the low-powered chip of choice in so many deployments that aren't just your traditional data center server or desktop computer. It's not even funny. It's kind of the chip of the future, and everybody wants a piece of it, including Docker. And it's a win for Docker. For ARM, they're probably just like, yeah, we have somebody else that we can another logo we can put up on our PowerPoint slides.
And that old NASCAR slide. We talked about Huawei a little bit ago, kind of being maybe a competitor for what Samsung is going to be doing with chip fabs, but they recently told journalists that they're working on something new, DNA storage. Now, they're not the first company to do this. We've seen Microsoft, Intel, IBM all make announcements around this. But while still in development, Huawei is planning to fit 700 terabytes into a 1 millimeter cube. So 1 millimeter on all sides. Or put it another way, they could back up all the world's data in about 16 pounds of DNA. What's the catch? This sounds awesome, right? Well, now writing 4 megabytes of data with the technology that they have takes roughly 5 days or about 10 bytes per second. We did a story about this in 2017 when Microsoft they announced that they were going to proto-commercialize, I don't know what that means, DNA storage somewhere around 2020. And they had claimed that they were able to get about 400 bytes per second of writes with the goal of hitting 100 megabytes per second for a fully commercialized product. So just to kind of show how far away they were from that in 2017. DNA is dense and durable, right? It's two really good things to have for storage, but will access speeds always keep this a niche solution if it ever gets commercialized at all?
Yeah. Well, all those things that you mentioned, it being dense and it being what was the other one? Durable. Yeah. I guess maybe if we talk about getting up to that, pie in the sky figure of 100 megabytes per second, then we've got maybe a viable archival storage platform, but not else than that. And what's the value prop over existing archival storage platforms at that? Is it that it's going to be smaller form factor and we can cram more into a data center or whatever location we're trying to deploy it in? I guess. Is it going to be lower power consumption? I don't even see any mention of that in the story. So why is it better other than we can fit a ton of data in a much smaller form factor? I'm not really clear on that. And I'm not sure what the value prop is, especially when we're talking about such slow access speeds. Who's going to want it? What's it good for?
Yeah, maybe it's a great end of the world archival apocalypse kind of storage medium. So when we need to restart human civilization, we can have our DNA storage computer that has all of the world's knowledge. But yeah, it's so far out from any kind of commercial product that, yes, it's a fascinating science experiment. Mm-hmm. And it's like in the news of really cool that we can do this. But yeah, until it gets some kind of viable access speed, you can't even begin to formulate those kind of questions that you would really want to ask of it, right?
Yeah, it might be a cool futuristic technology that actually makes sense somewhere in the next 10 to 30 years, whatever the case may be. But right now, I can't really see what it will be good for other than scientists playing around with it.
Well, just to give you an idea, though, of the density that it's capable of hitting, the max capacity for magnetic media, basically the best case scenario for like tape storage, for example, is 23 gigabits per square centimeter, right? Okay, so it's because that's a 2D medium, basically. You're only able to write on two dimensions there. Researchers at Harvard had previously found at least a capacity of 5.5 petabits per cubed millimeter, or millimeter cubed, or whatever. So
Wow.
there is several orders of magnitude more density that you can fit into that medium. Admittedly, it would take you longer than the span of all of human civilization to fill up that capacity, right?
Right. And are we running out of physical space for all our storage media in the world? I mean, I guess it would be great to shrink data centers. Who wouldn't be in favor of that? It's probably going to, reduce, costs in many ways and, reduce energy consumption. So hooray. Yeah, that's a great goal to have, but it's not the immediate need that I see these days.
And just from a science perspective, DNA is something that we understand because, it's the building block of life. There's a lot of science behind it, right? So, but I have to wonder, is that the ideal organic method of storage, right? Or is there another kind of artificial organic compound that we could create that would be better suited for this medium? It's just that we understand DNA better. I guess that's more of a science fiction question than anything, but it got me thinking that when I was reading this piece.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, what else can we store data on? Maybe we'll have a petri dish full of bacteria storing our life's data on it. Who knows?
Well, what I do know is that this is the end of the Gestalt IT rundown. Ken, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, Rich. My pleasure as always.
Where can people find more of your great stuff?
I am all over the Twitters. I am at Ken Nalbone. I'm also writing constantly on gestaltit.com. And you can find me sometimes on my Batman job, as Tom Hollingsworth likes to say, at least, over at techfieldday.com. We will be at Dell Technologies World next week on Wednesday, May 1st. So check us out then, starting at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time, May 1st.
Absolutely. And you can find me at gestaltit.com as well, or on the Twitters at Mr. Anthropology. That's MR Anthropology. We'll be back next Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, running down the IT news of the week. Until then, remember, everybody, have a super sparkly day.